Our guest today on Red Lens podcast is someone that I hadn't really gotten to know until pretty recently when I was in DC in June for the Positive Force DC 40th anniversary benefit concerts. I'm sure we must have been at many of the same DC punk shows back in the late 80s and 90s, but at that time in my life, I was too shy to talk to a lot of the quote unquote older people in the scene then who now looking back, I can realize were maybe just a couple years older than I was, but it seemed like a big deal at the time. People who had been around longer than me. But anyway, I'm happy that we got to talk recently and that we're here again talking today. So welcome to Red Lens Podcast, Jim Saah.
Thanks so much for having me.
So why don't we jump in just to find out first? I'm curious when and how you first got into photography. You were shooting black and white photos at 1980s punk shows. That might be some of your most famous work, at least it's what I'm most familiar with. And clearly you had some skill when you were doing those photos already. So just curious, did you get into photography to document those shows and kind of learn as you went, or were you already into photography and already had those skills honed before you started going to shoot at hardcore shows?
These two great loves came together around the same time. I was 16, 17, I think the 10th or 11th grade in high school. I decided to take a photography course. And for no particular reason other than it sounded fun and you got to go in a dark room and see this magic happen and use chemicals and everything. So I'm taking the class and I'm doing my assignments, landscape, portraiture, this and that, and I'm having a good time. I'm taking pictures of my friends and I'm learning some stuff. And occasionally I see a picture and I go, "Oh, that's good," or "the light is good on that," or whatnot. But then I went to my first punk rock show, and the first one I didn't take a camera to. And then I was like, wow, this is so kinetic and energetic and crazy. Like, I need to take pictures of this. So then I started bringing the camera to shows, which was a school loaned camera, the workhorse of all school film photography programs, a Pentax K1000, fully manual camera with a 50 millimeter, very pretty fast lens. I think it was either a 1.8 or 2.0 lens, which was great for clubs and shooting bands. And then to answer your question, like I did have a few skills, like I was learning how to compose an image, but a punk rock show is different than taking a portraiture or a landscape that isn't moving or moving in every direction at the same time. And so I had to learn skills on the job, and the flash was a good way to stop the action, and I had to learn, everything was manual back then, so it's not like the camera and the flash didn't talk to one another or anything. So I had to set the flash and yeah, and then I just started seeing pictures that were like, oh my God, like this speaks to me and I need to do more of this. And then I started honing my live concert skills from there.
What year did you start going to shows? Because you have pictures from some of the early DC punk hardcore shows.
Yeah, I missed the first wave. Like it was 1982. So Bad Brains, it was like 79, their like heyday in DC, and then Teen Idols were 80, which I missed those bands. They were, well, I didn't miss Bad Brains. They came back and stuff, but I missed their punk days, their like seminal punky days. They came back later from New York and when they were more like reggae and dub and stuff. But yeah, Minor Threat was probably my big first love DC band that I saw many times and just loved. And then Void and Scream and Faith and Marginal Man, and that was sort of the era that I got into it at.
And I moved to DC in 1987, so I came a little later. But at that time, I would drag my camera with me to 930 Club or DC Space or some places like that. And a lot of times I would decide not to bring my camera because it was an area that the prospect of, carrying an expensive piece of equipment, getting it stolen wasn't inconceivable. So did you ever have those concerns, or you just brought your camera wherever? You said it was a school loaned camera too.
Yeah, yeah. I did have those concerns. The early 80s, as I'm sure you know, and it was still in the mid 80s when you moved there, it was the crack epidemic, and it was the murder capital of the country. We had a homicide practically every day in the early 80s, and it was dangerous. People did get held up on their way to shows. Luckily, I was never held up or things stolen off my person. My car was broken into many times and things stolen out of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I had those concerns, but I just wanted to, I didn't have expensive gear. I mean, for the time, it probably looked like someone could sell it for something, but I didn't have a fancy camera bag. I just made everything look crappy and, like a backpack and stuff. So people would not, get their spidey senses up when they saw my stuff.
So the speaking of your images that you took at those shows in the 80s, you have a book that collects a lot of those photos called In My Eyes, Photographs 1982 to 1997. And recently, I think a second edition came out. Yeah, why don't you tell us about the book? What's in it? When did it come out? And why'd you put it out?
Yeah, people have been telling me for decades that I should do a book, and I always kind of wanted to, but my photos have appeared in many newspapers and magazines and record covers and inside records and other books, like one of the first ones, Banned in DC, that came out, in 83 or 4 or something. And I had a lot of images in the 82, 83 part of that book because it's kind of chronological. And then Scott Crawford and I, when we made Salad Days, he made a kind of a companion book to the movie, and I had a lot of images in that. So I kind of felt like, my stuff's getting out there, and I am a working photographer, so I was always working, and I also had a couple of kids in there, and just the amount of time it takes to figure out how to make a book and or get a publisher or whatever. I just never put it to the front burner. So, fast forward, I'm a man of a certain age. I'm kind of slowing down on my on my amount of shooting I do. I kind of am more discerning. I don't just take every job I get. I sort of more picky. I do the ones I want to do. I have the luxury of doing that now. And I found I had a little more time on my hands. And then couple that with being invited to show Salad Days in Argentina at a film festival and meeting a guy that's quite a bit younger than me, very enthusiastic. It reminded me of me a little bit when I was younger, and also knows a lot about DC hardcore and punk rock. Like, grew up in Argentina in Buenos Aires. He was probably like 32 at the time. He's probably like 35 now or something, but just an encyclopedia. I mean, if someone asked me something, I'd be like, "Hey, who, what did, what band was that?" Then, and he would, I'm the one that lived it, and but my memory not so great anymore. But I remember a lot. But anyway, his enthusiasm and everything was infectious, and he has a little indie publishing house in Argentina, which until my book came out, it was just him licensing English language books
Hmm.
for Spanish language. So he would buy the rights to a lot of the 33 and a third books, and he bought the rights to Spoke and published it in Argentina in Spanish. And so this book was the first like North American English language book he did, and it's super. I mean, I didn't self-publish, but it's as close to self-publishing as you get because it's real, they're in Argentina and I'm here and I basically do everything. I actually do fulfillment and super DIY. So that's how it came to be. Why I did it, I think that, like I said, my stuff was out there, but I'm really glad I did do it because I didn't really understand that it's different if it's your book than if your photos are just in another book. Like it's a much different experience, and it's enabled me to exhibit my work more. And then, you have a book to go along with the exhibit. So people come to see the photos on the wall and they can buy the photos on the wall, or they can, leave with a book. So it's been a great ride. The first edition came out in October of 21, sort of like very COVID-y lockdown time. It wasn't like total lockdown, but it was still messed up and it affected the shipping of my book and everything. But it came out and I did well with it, and it was sold out within a little over a year. And then I waited to see if there was still an interest or if everyone that wanted it got it or whatnot. And I kept getting requests by people saying, "Hey, I thought I'd have a chance to get your book," and I was just like, didn't know it would sell out. Like, are you going to do another more copies or whatever? So I think I waited about almost a year, and then we did a limited second run. And I'm almost by the end of the year, I'll probably be out of the second edition.
Just double checking which version I have. Okay, I have the first edition. Ha.
Yeah,
So cool. When I ordered that, then you're the one who boxed it up and shipped it out. I like it.
yeah, yeah,
So for folks that haven't seen the book, I would encourage you to get it. It's a substantial book. It's large, both in size and in number of pages and number of photos. So it's a really great book. And one thing I wanted to ask about, you wrote an introduction to the book where you say, and I'm going to do a little quote here, "I found taking pictures at shows very rewarding. I was so focused and loved experiencing the music while making visual art from it. I would be more tuned in to the whole scene through documenting it. It made me feel alive." So I found that quote interesting because the conventional wisdom, especially in this day and age where everyone almost pulls out their phone to snap some shots or some video during a show, is that people say, well, if you're taking photos looking at your little screen, you're not as connected, you're not in the moment. Yeah, can you say a little bit more about that? Because I feel like I can really relate. I love bringing my camera to shows. It helps me sort of lock in and really focus on everything that's happening so I can anticipate, moments coming up to get shots, and love to hear
yeah.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's it is conventional wisdom now to not look at, be present and don't look at what's happening through the screen of your camera, your phone. So I get that. But what I meant by that quote is that, my friends would say the same thing to me back then. Like, don't bring your camera, just go and enjoy the show, and just hang out or whatever. But, enjoy, quote unquote. Like, I enjoyed the show photographing it. And I didn't feel like I was trying to steal a piece of the night for posterity or whatnot. I just was compelled to, you can use the word document. I didn't really feel like I was documenting anything, like a scene or anything. I mean, I saw the We Are Fugazi movie again last night, the crowdsourced live video film of Fugazi. And, a lot of people talk about, did you know you were documenting something so important and stuff? And, I didn't. And I just did it because I was compelled to do it. And I wanted to go to these shows and I wanted to photograph them. And as you say, I felt the same way, like locked in, like if I take my camera, I'm up near the front, I'm paying attention to the music. Like I know the songs, or I try to know the songs. So I know when there's going to be like a drum break or something where people are going to jump or do something, I'm paying really close attention. And, I am looking at it through my camera, a lot of it, but I'm seeing it and, I'm paying attention. And, those times where my friend said, don't take your camera and enjoy the show. Like I'm probably further in the back and people are talking to me or we're having beers or someone's making a joke and I'm not paying as much attention. So I'm actually experiencing the show on a deeper level when I'm photographing it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And like I said, I feel similarly, very much so.
Mm, mhm.
So one other thing I'd like to get your thoughts on that you said in that introduction is that the audience and the way they participated in the performance was a big part of the show and my work. You could see the band and the audience energizing each other. So for people who haven't seen your book, literally the cover photo, turn the page, the first photo in the book, and so many of the photos all the way through show not just the quote unquote rock stars up the band up on the stage, but show the people in the crowd either exclusively or interacting with the performers. So, and in so many cases, that interaction really makes the photos. I'd love to hear you say just a little bit more about that, the importance of including that interaction with the audience in your photos.
Yeah, well, that was a big part of why punk rock was appealing to me because I think first, the first show I remember concert going to was a big arena show at this hockey or basketball arena called the Capitol Center in like Landover, Maryland, a little bit outside the city. And my brother took me to see Bruce Springsteen on like the River Tour in like 1980. Like he was in to Springsteen, and I liked him well enough. But that's what I thought a concert was, sitting up in these little seats and the performers are way down there and it doesn't sound particularly great because those places aren't made for live music. And so that's what I thought. So then I go to a punk rock show and like there's people on the stage singing along with the band. Like there's a picture of Minor Threat that is like exemplary of this for me because Ian Mackay is just laying on a mound of people and he's singing, but like the mic is nowhere to be seen and the people are singing and it's this like joyous, crazy event. And that's what appealed to me because you weren't a spectator, you were a participant. So you didn't just go to a show to watch, you went to be part of a community and participate in it. And you were welcomed to participate. They wanted your participation because they got energy from you, as you said, and vice versa.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I had been to Rush concerts and big arenas, and then once I experienced a punk show, it was just never, there's no going back, really.
I feel that way now. Like if I'll go see like David Byrne is touring in the fall and he's not going to be in an arena, but he's going to be in a 6,000 person place, like the biggest place I probably ever go see a show. But I'll go because I want to see him. But I really won't go to arenas. I mean, I don't really like any arena bands enough to go see them, but I have friends that, love Pearl Jam or Foo Fighters and they'll go, and especially not even an arena, but Foo Fighters play like stadiums, like football stadiums and stuff. I just can't imagine seeing a show with 70,000 other people. It's just not appealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, once you start
Not that I
having those,
dislike the Foo Fighters. I'm not
of
dissing the
course.
Foo Fighters. I'm just saying that I really enjoyed the show they played at the Atlantis for 450 people. That was an amazing show and they're great performers and musicians and stuff. I just don't really want to go to a stadium to see anybody. If the Beatles were reincarnated and
Then you'd
came
go, yeah.
back, I'd go, but
Yeah, when I talked with Pat Graham for the podcast, I asked him about that because he started, of course, like we did, shows in churches and basements and wherever, and then started touring with Modest Mouse as they got bigger. And so just the differences between even taking photos at the smaller shows versus in different size kind of arenas photographically, it's just a different experience.
Right.
Why don't we continue just a little bit about the on the photography sort of nerd tip? You mentioned before that when you first started taking pictures, you were using what did you say, a Pentax with a 50 millimeter
Yeah, K1.
lens?
Yeah, K1000.
Is that what you were shooting with throughout that all the photos that are in the book, or most of the photos with the 50 millimeter lens? Is that what you like to shoot with at shows?
Well, that's just like what I had. Um, you know, I preferred something a little wider because, I like to get up close and get wide, as Robert Capa famously said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And more dangerous for him being a war photographer, but I think he got a little too close. But I kind of felt that way and I wanted to be in the action and stuff. So I did end up buying a 35 millimeter lens or a 28. I can't remember, but it was a little wider than a 50. And then when I graduated from high school, I stopped using the K1000. And instead of buying a K1000, I bought an AE1, a Canon AE1, which was could be a little more automatic, but I rarely use those features anyway because I already just was used to doing everything manual. So I just sort of operated it like I did the K1000, and it was a little maybe lighter and faster feeling, and I stuck with that until it broke and got another one, and then stuck with Canon. I don't know, brand loyalty or what, but I just, you acquire things, lenses and stuff, and then you don't want to change a body and go to Nikon or something. So I just was a Canon user for 40 years. I still use their digital equipment.
Yeah, I had the Canon A1 program was my first quote unquote real camera, and that's what I was shooting
Mhm.
with at shows back then. I also remember first getting it's probably a 28 millimeter and bringing that to a show, and just it was like mind blowing the difference of what you could do at a show with that
Right.
versus a 50 millimeter lens.
Especially when you're trying to get the audience and the performer in the
Mhm.
shot as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, were you only shooting black and white back then and developing and printing everything yourself, or did you have your own darkroom, or just using your high school darkroom?
Yeah, it started off with using my high school one and just doing black and white because that's what they did. I think there was one class in photography too, and then my teacher, because me and like maybe one other person were so into it, they made a photography three class just for us. It was sort of like, I mean, he gave us assignments and stuff, but it was we sort of set the tone for it. But I think there was one time where we did a color unit where we learned how to develop color film and grant, or I think that was in college actually, because I continued to take photography in college, and we never did that in high school. It was just all black and white. And then when I got out of high school, I wanted access to a dark room, and I went to college for a while and had access to their dark room. And then after that, I got a job working in a darkroom, and the guy that owned the place, it was a photo studio and darkroom. He did he would copy old photographs and repair them and stuff. This was even a little bit before Photoshop. I mean, I think Photoshop was coming in. He would actually do retouching with the old-fashioned way, like painting on them or
Wow.
whatever. But anyway, so I worked there for quite a number of years, kind of while I was shooting, because I kind of became a professional photographer at this point. I was getting gigs, and that was like a little side hustle doing his darkroom work. And that just gave me access to a darkroom. And then I eventually had my own darkroom in my house, and I still do to this day.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mainly use it for developing film, and then I scan the film but if someone wants a silver print, if I mean, honestly, I used to, silver prints were really like, if you're going to sell an image, it was like, it used to be the only way to do it, not a digital one. Digital people turn their, noses at like a archival pigment print, but they've really gotten so good. And the kinds of papers, you can get so much different kind of papers that I actually I had a big exhibit at Lost Origins Gallery when the book came out. It's a community art gallery in DC. Great place. And I made a couple of silver prints, to put up so people can see the difference. And if you wanted a silver print, you could, if you were a collector or something, and you wanted a print that I made with, in the darkroom with my own hands, then you could have it. And um, Tom Lyle, who was the guitarist in GI and a records music, is an audiophile, like has a million records. I don't think the guy's ever recorded digitally because he thinks like analog tape sounds better and is better and stuff. So he asked me, what's the difference between this one and this one, pointing to a silver print in the darkroom and an archival pigment print made on a digital printer.
Hmm.
And I told him, I'm like, and I'm like, not that he wouldn't understand, but I wanted it to be more relatable. And I'm like, you record, you think things sound better on tape. And so this was made with a fully analog process with light going through the actual negative, exposing the paper, developing it in the chemicals. No computers were used for this picture, but
Yeah.
computers were used for this one. And he thinks about it and he takes it in and he goes, "Oh, I like that one better," pointing to the archival pigment one.
Huh.
So
Interesting.
I'm like, all right, I'm not like, and Jason Hammaker, the guy that owns that gallery, I asked him as the curator and the owner of the gallery, I said, some photographers tell me I have to only display silver prints, darkroom prints. Some people say, that's what you have to do. And he looked at me and he's like, nobody cares. And I'm like, wow, like, is that true? Because I used to display back in the day, but they were all silver prints because like, I did some punk rock shows. I did some travel photography shows and like cafes and stuff. But now I had this dilemma, and he was right. He was really right. Like people, occasionally someone will be a collector, and
Hmm.
they'll be like, "I want you to sign it. I want you to make it." And maybe I don't do a lot of limited edition numbering because I just want people to enjoy the art and be able to afford it. And it's not about collecting or scarcity or whatever. Not to me anyway.
Hmm.
So I got on a tangent there, but
No, that was very interesting, though. I appreciate that.
mhm.
So I'd like to, if you don't mind, talk about some of the specific images in the book, in my eyes. Some of them, for people who have been looking at punk photos or records going back to the 80s, some of them will look very familiar, and would just love to hear a little bit more of the background on them.
Mhm.
So, possibly one of the most seen ones on there is the image of Fugazi with Guy face down on the ground that was used on the cover of the Repeater record. Can you just talk a little bit about that image? What is the image, and like how did you capture that moment?
Yeah, that was at the old 930 Club, or the original 930 Club, and they played two nights in a row, which was peculiar. I mean, they usually, I guess they were. This was 1989, and the summer of '89, and yeah, I went to both shows, and that was at the end of the second night, and he was just kind of starting to play more guitar, like not just starting. I mean, he had been he originally didn't play guitar when they started, and he was just like would back up sing, and then he started introducing some more guitar. And I'm not sure of my time. I mean, they started in '87, and this was '89, so he was probably playing a good amount of guitar by now. But on this song Glue Man, he didn't play guitar, and that was usually the song where they ended with it quite a bit, and it would give him the freedom to go crazy and to jump around. And so he was just going ape. And, the song ends, he hits the ground, the mic stand is broken. Like you see the top of the mic stand, and he just like face down. And it just, there was so much energy, and then it all came to like a stop in a second. And I was following his action like all over, with him jumping around and freaking out. And then when he just he hit the ground kind of hard, like he just threw himself on the ground. And I followed him to the ground, and it was with a wide lens, and I was on the stage, which, you can't really do that anymore. And unless you're friends, you're the tour photographer or something. And I snapped a shot. And Bert Queros was standing above me, and he's got a shot like kind of close, but it's like looking down. I think, mine, because it's a wide shot and like his feet get big in it. It's just a little more like kind of in your face, like a
Mhm.
little more visceral. And I put that picture on the back of the book because it's like that's the end of the show, That's like they gave it their all and like collapsed. And that was a shot. And I was actually kind of surprised because Kurt Seunga, who did the design for that record, he did a magazine called Greed, and he was friends with the band. And he asked me for some photos because he was going to put this record together. So I just sent him some stuff, and he didn't confer with me, and he didn't like, I didn't see it until it was done. And he told me, oh, I used a picture on the cover. And I was like, which one? And he's like, the one of Guy, like, on the stage. And I'm like, I was a little surprised because I'm like, out of all the like shots of them, swinging guitars and, crazy faces and energy, like he picked the one of Guy face down on the stage, But I get it. And the way he cut was sort of innovative. Like people have done it a lot since then, but the way he cut the name of the record and the band out of the photo. And it's kind of cool when I exhibit that photo because a lot of people have been exposed to it through the letters, repeater, Fugazi repeater, but then they get to see the whole thing. And sometimes people will be like, oh, I recognized it, but I wasn't sure why. And, I think
Mhm.
that's kind of cool.
That is cool. So, can you tell me about there's several photos of Henry Rollins playing with Black Flag, but one in particular where his arms are down by his sides with his hands balled into fists, and the microphone is like literally inside his mouth and he's screaming. Can you talk about that photo?
Yeah, that one, if you look closely at that one, like it's just his veins are popping out and his fists are really clenched hard, and he's just got, I mean, I don't know if I could get a sure SM58 like in my mouth, like it would, but he's just got that silver ball, that I industry standard microphone to this day, like just shoved completely in his mouth. And it's, their just shows were so intense. And I think Henry, especially, just like facial expressions, and it was kind of scary a little bit, like it's like, he's transcending the room, and channeling something else. And that photo is like that. Like I mean, he didn't talk a lot between songs and stuff, and like they were just really intense, like the from beginning to end. And I mean, you can there's some videos out there of their later stuff, and I mean, some of the shows like in LA, there's videos of like them becoming violent and him like like him beating on people and stuff. But like DC, that was like a homecoming for him. And it was, I never remember any fights or any, when I say scary, it was scary like watching him be so intense, but I was never scared for like that something was going to happen or I'd be injured or something.
Hmm. Yeah, I saw them in 1986 was the first time I saw Black Flag, so it's definitely in their more slower and
Yeah, grindier.
grindier period, but that was yeah, equally intense.
Mm,
Or maybe not equally, but it was intense for me as a 16-year-old seeing him.
yeah.
Tell me about the photos that you included there from Fugazi playing at your Lorton Youth Correctional Center in Virginia. They played inside a jail. I guess I hadn't realized or hadn't remembered that you were there with them documenting that. Tell us about that experience a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was a very unique experience, and I'm glad they invited me because that's the only way I could have gone if I was invited. And it was the day after Christmas in 1990, and I think Mark Anderson from Positive Force probably presented this idea to them to have a show at a youth correctional center. I mean, it was Lorton, it was a full prison for adults, but they had this youth correctional center where a lot of the people were obviously younger. So he thought playing music for these guys would be good. So the band was into it and they went, and I think it was enjoyable for the people there because I don't think they got to see live, any kind of like entertainment in the correctional center. So, people say, oh, was it like a Johnny Cash kind of a thing? And I guess you can draw those similarities, but in all honesty, the kids didn't know who the hell Fugazi was. And they were yelling like, I remember someone yelled out AC/DC, they probably didn't even like AC/DC. They knew this was a rock band of white guys, so they were just going to yell a white rock band that they knew, maybe they
Yeah.
knew an AC/DC song or something. But Ian's like, oh, we don't play cover songs. And, there's pictures of them jumping around and dancing and stuff. And they were having a good time. They didn't know the music, but it was a super interesting thing to experience. And it was really funny because there's pictures in, like, I did a photo essay. There's a few pictures in the book, but I did a more fuller photo essay in a fanzine that came out that I was doing at the time. And there's all these pictures of like them searching everyone. Like there's a picture of Joe with his backpack completely empty on the floor, and they made him like take their shoestrings off, and they did all this stuff. And then Ian says, well, the van is outside with like our gear for the show. And the guy's like, oh, okay, well, open the fence. And they just back a van up into the prison and no one looks at it. At least that's my recollection. I don't know if it went through some kind of metal detector but Ian remembers it that way too. They just back a van full of stuff and start loading it in. So it's our prison system at work.
That's hilarious. Just all that security, but then total just let some
Yeah,
van back in,
a
which
whole
who knows,
van
could have anything
could have
in
been
there.
full of machine guns for all we know.
Wow. Since this is a political photography podcast, why don't we switch gears a little bit to talk about politics more explicitly? In your photography book, In My Eyes, you say that punk opened your eyes, quote, not only to music, but to politics as well. Lyrics by the Dead Kennedys and Gang of Four got me reading the newspaper and getting books out of the library. It showed me the power of protest music and that it is or can be a call to action. And there are some photos in your book from events like Rock Against Racism and other things like that. So, yeah, why don't you tell us a little more about your politics and how you see that in interaction between music and politics?
Yeah, sure. I, like any good punk rocker worth their salt, I had a healthy distrust of authority. I questioned authority, and I, got kind of in trouble at a young age in school and different places for not doing what I was told or asking questions and not just, I even got kicked out of the Cub Scouts, if I remember. Like, no, I don't remember why, but that quote is true because I did go to college and I mainly took photography courses, but I really learned about the world through books and doing stuff, and not just newspapers and magazines. But I realized that from a pretty young age that you can't really trust the newspapers, and I read. The People's History by Howard Zinn at a pretty young age, and I was set on this path of kind of resisting or questioning. And I'm Palestinian American, so from the time I became politically aware, I did start protesting for the human rights of Palestinians through the first Intifada and the second Intifada. And then we had the Gulf War One and then the Gulf War Two, which we protested a lot and I photographed a lot. And then social justice was sort of like, okay, music photography was my first love with photography. I found photography and I found punk rock, and I loved that, and I was doing it a lot. And I started working in photography, but not really news or anything, mostly arts and entertainment type stuff. But one of my early influences was a photographer named Sebastião Salgado, and
Mhm.
he did a book called Workers that I really affected me, and I wanted to document the humanity of work and of and people being taken advantage of for their work and whatnot. So then I started traveling because he was a real inspiration. So I went to Palestine in 1992 and again in 1994. It was kind of around the time of the Oslo so-called peace accords. And I saw a lot of changes there. There was sort of a little bit of hope that kind of was crushed pretty fast about some sort of possible Palestinian state. All the while, settlements were increasing, and I went on tours with the UNRWA relief organization. I went to a lot of the schools in the West Bank. I went to hospitals. I even went to some prisons. I went to Gaza and photographed the camps, that were supposed to be temporary, but these refugee camps that, were there at that time for, 50 years. And that really had an effect on me. And then I went to Lebanon a little bit after the Civil War ended, and I documented like some the tobacco farming in the South, which was very rewarding. I hope to show pictures from this area soon. I'll probably take a break from my punk rock book. My book will probably be sold out by the end of the year, so it's a good time to maybe take a break and exhibit some of these pictures from West Asia or the Middle East. And then I traveled a lot more too. Street photography was a big thing with me, and I would like to try and get back into it. It's like sometimes it's easier with a phone, and then sometimes it's harder. Like I like to have a little more control, but also phones are good because everyone's got a phone, and if you have a nice camera and you're pointing it at someone, they see you, they might change what they're doing, but a phone. But anyway, I'm trying to figure that out because I want to get back into street photography.
Mm.
And an interesting story linking music with protest and everything. I on one of these trips that I was on, I not only went to the Middle East, but I went to like Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And I was in Berlin when I happened to notice posters that Fugazi was playing like that night, the night I arrived. And of course, we had to go. So we went. And this was in 1992 during the first Gulf War, was kind of winding down, but there was still lots of bombing raids on Kuwait. And there's a photo in the book of Ian Mackay with his guitar up to his face. And, if you didn't know better, you'd, think it was like a Jimi Hendrix thing, like playing with his teeth or something. But what he was actually doing is yelling into his pickups, "How many sorties today?"
Mm.
And I don't really know, like they don't use it that much anymore, but back then it was they called all the bombing raids sorties. I know it's a French word that means like exit, but that's what they called them then. And it was really a pretty powerful moment because here I am, I'm out of the country and I'm traveling and I see my friends and I'm seeing this music and it's all great and everyone's having a good time. And then he kind of grounds you in thinking that, oh shit, people are getting bombs dropped on their head right now,
Mhm.
And I have a lot of older brothers and sisters that protested the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of protest music in the house. And I just thought, wow, this is like, I never belittled that stuff. I was never like, oh, like that was all hippie shit or something. I always really liked protest music,
Yeah.
whether it be Bob Dylan or Buffalo Springfield or like whoever. I really did like it and listen to it as a young person a lot. But I did find that moment to just be really powerful. Yeah, I still do it. I've been to a lot of Palestinian protests throughout this last 2 years. We screened Salad Days last night, a movie that I worked on, and we talked about that a little bit already. And I see those noise protests at the South African embassy, and there's a lot of kids out there doing it, but there's a lot of old people, older people my age I see out there too. But I haven't seen one of my punk rock brethren from back in the day. Like, we've had so many noise protests. Like when Netanyahu comes to town, we, go out and beat on things outside where he stays and the White House and stuff. But, it's disappointing. You're never too old to have a voice, and you had one then, so you should still have it now.
Very much so. Yeah. I would love to follow up just a little bit. It sounds like you were talking about maybe doing some exhibitions or something of some of the photos that you took in Palestine and Lebanon. I would love to see some of those. Do you think you might do a book sometime or
Yeah, I think if I have a lot of stuff, and the show would probably be more like narrowed down to like just the Levant. I'm thinking about calling it like Balad al Sham, like that area, the greater Palestine like area. And it would be mostly Palestine, a little Syria, a good bit of Lebanon, South Lebanon and Lebanon, and maybe a few shots from Jordan. Yeah, it could be like a small book, like a small run, book. I have a lot from Egypt. I spent a month in Egypt. So a book could be a little bit more wider scope than the show. I don't know. I've been thinking about it. I'm probably going to have it at a gallery here in DC in the spring of next year. I hope you can, maybe come to town for it. And because it's right in line with like kind of what you do and your podcast and everything. I think I could do a book. I have another punk rock book in the mix, but I'm a little. This book will probably be sold out by the end of the year, and I have a European version coming out, which I'll probably go and tour on in November. I'm working that out now, and that'll be fun. It'll mostly the publisher's in Italy, might be mostly in Italy, and then maybe we wanted to do like France and Germany and Spain. I have an offer to have a show in Malaga. They have a big festival every year, and it's kind of too late to get on it this for this fall, but that might be a separate trip or something. But I'm getting a little. I just want to do something a little different. I've been working this book for a couple years, and having it sell out will be a nice point to take a break and do something else. With my photography.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I imagine there'd be quite a bit of interest in those images at this point in history, particularly for a lot of reasons. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. There's a lot of people I could partner with too. There's a museum here in DC called the Museum of the Palestinian People. If you've never been, next time you're in town, we should go. My mother's British Mandate passport is part of the collection there.
Oh, wow.
And it's nice because it's called the Museum of the Palestinian People, not of Palestine, because it's about the people and the culture and the heritage. And, you can't help being political sometimes in some things, but they don't concentrate on the politics. They concentrate on the people.
Hmm. Very cool. And then just one other follow-up question. You talked about Sebastião Salgado and his photos of workers being an inspiration for you, which is very much the case for me as well. And would love to hear, I think you've done photos not just internationally, but in the US, focused on workers as well, and like strikes and unions and stuff. Anything you'd want to add about that?
Yeah, I was a freelance photographer from the beginning. I think my first picture where I consider myself like I was in like city papers and a lot in the early mid 80s, but I got published in the Washington Post in 1986, and that sort of kicked off my career a little bit, because then I got noticed other places and then I got started getting hired by the Post, as I never worked, as a staff photographer, but worked as a freelancer for until like 2000, like quite a bit, and then they changed their rules on usage and stuff, and how the photojournalism, the way that went. So then I stopped shooting for them, but I did. One of my biggest clients as a freelancer was the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and I freelanced from them from about 2000 to 2006, like being pretty much their main go-to photographer. I did their conventions and meetings in Las Vegas. I did strikes. I traveled to strikes and meetings, like UPS negotiation meetings. I would photograph, and then in around 2006 they said, look, they had a video company that they were doing video with, and then they were using me for photography, and they're like, we want to bring this in house, and we'd love for you to do it. I do video too, and they knew that, and so they wanted me to. They didn't. I asked them about a job a few times, but they didn't have the budget to just hire a photographer. But they had a budget if I was going to be a photographer and videographer, because they were spending a lot of money on video in addition to what they were spending on photography.
Hmm.
So it ended up being, a good deal for them. And, I was a freelancer, so I was paying for my own health care, and I have two kids. And so I got good health care. And actually, to tell you the truth, it was a tough decision, because in the, early 2000s, I was doing well as a freelancer. I was making good money. I was making my own hours. I had a lot of free time to spend with my children.
Hmm.
And I never had a job where I had to go into an office, like never until 2006. Like I always, I had like college jobs in record stores and stuff. But like, basically from the time I started a working life, I've been a photographer. And it wasn't immediately successful. It was lean and my wife worked and stuff. But then, it got good. And I was like, I'm giving up my freedom, but I'm also giving up my biggest client. So it's like I sort of had to do it and then see if I didn't like it, I could always quit. It was my thinking. But the job had a lot of flexibility, a lot of travel. So I wasn't like, chained to a desk every day. My boss was actually really pretty cool. And, being a photographer, I had to go shoot strikes on weekends and stuff. And if I'm working all weekend, I'd be like, well, can I just like not come in Monday, And he, just as long as I got the work in, he was cool. So it was a good run. I really enjoyed it. I did it for 15 years. Then we had COVID and we all were working from home for a couple years. And then the administration changed and they made a lot of changes. And I kind of took early, I don't know if it's early or late. I took an exit. I didn't really feel like I wanted to, like after 2 years at home, I would have got used to it. Like I never thought I could go into an office to begin with when I originally took the job, but I did it and I did it and it was fine. But I really didn't feel like going back to that. And luckily the stars aligned and anyone that has a job like that, there's years of service and age, and there's always this magic number that
Yeah.
and I just hit it. By my birthday is March 16th, and I basically got laid off on March 22nd. And the magic number for them was 15 years of service and 57 years old, and I got them. So it made the departure much more palatable because I got to keep my health care and I got a pension and stuff. So God bless the Teamsters. I enjoyed the work. I'm very pro union. It was good work and I could get behind it.
Yeah, well, I'm a rank and file Teamster, so I appreciate your service documenting all of the
Hmm.
strikes
Hmm.
and negotiations and everything.
Yeah.
Is there any particular strike that comes to mind that rally anything that maybe you'd want to say a little bit about?
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, there was the UPS ones were always a big deal because they were the biggest employer of the Teamsters. Like, I don't know what it is up to now. There was like 250,000, maybe it's up to 300,000 people now, out of the 1.2 or 4 million members of the Teamsters.
yeah, it's the biggest private sector contract in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So those were always a big deal. And I wasn't there in 97 for the strike. So there was never a UPS strike, but there was always like threatening and negotiations and sometimes walkouts and stuff. Those were always kind of fun. We tried to. It was unsuccessful. I like to remember the successful ones. We organized a lot of school bus drivers, which was good in the South. They just get like really taken advantage of and have to work long hours and wait around, and they don't have bus monitors, and they have a bus full of kids for like one person and stuff. So that was we had a lot of strikes and we had a lot of successes with that. First student and a bunch of things there. We had a long campaign for port drivers out in LA and
Mm.
Long Beach, and which was not successful. It was a tough slog because they're easily abused people because some of them are undocumented and they got to wait around at the port all day in these lines and then get their shipment, and they don't get paid, and then for the time waiting, and they're owner operators, and so they have to pay for their gas and their fuel and everything. But we had a lot of strikes and a lot of protests, and we worked on a bunch of companies like XPO. And but yeah, I think the new administration abandoned that campaign because it was like I mean, I guess you have to cut your losses at some point, but we did have some legislative victories in that, but we never really got to organize anyone.
I don't know if you have rights to those photos or if they belong to the Teamsters, but I imagine you have some incredible photos from all that period as well.
Yeah, the 2000 to 2006, as a freelancer, I own the copyright to all those. And then from 2006 to 2021, they own them.
Hmm.
But I have I can't sell them or anything, but I can, I have things on my website and stuff, and I have a lot of good photos from those port protests where we did action where we blocked a highway one time and stuff, and it
Hmm.
was good stuff, good trouble.
Very cool. Yeah, several of my smaller projects that I've been working on are focused on workers. I did one during COVID of frontline healthcare workers and things like that. So
Awesome. Awesome.
something I always try to focus in my work as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to see those photos sometimes.
Well, I'm going to try to transition away from that intense section of the interview to go back to your book for a minute, and then on to another book that you already mentioned to hear a little bit more about that book. You mentioned that you've been doing some photo exhibitions for In My Eyes, I think. Tell us about that. Are there any coming up?
Yeah, I launched the book with the one I mentioned. It was like 45 pieces in Lost Origins in DC. And when the book came out. And then since then, I've had shows in New York City, in Los Angeles, in Baltimore. I'm working on one in Philadelphia. I had one in Richmond, Virginia also. I have one coming up in San Antonio in September. And and then I'm going to do a book tour in on my way to a music festival that's been going on for over 20 years in Gainesville, Florida, called The Fest. And they invited me to come down and photograph it. And I went last year, and it's a fun festival. It's in a small, like relatively small town of Gainesville, and it's I'm not a big festival person, but the ones where it shows all over town in different clubs appeal to me than just like three big stages where you're out in the sun all day
Mhm.
and whatnot. They do have one big venue that is their biggest venue. The bigger bands play, and it is outdoors, but it was a fun thing, and I'm gonna hit some dates on my way down there. I might do a little pop-up art show and a book talk. I show slides, and I kind of give a little background to some of my favorite images from the book. So I'm going to do that, I think, in Richmond, in Chapel Hill, at a nice bar that's owned by a guy that used to live in DC and transplanted down there. Then Athens, Georgia. I did a talk there last year, but I'm trying to set it up with three generations of photographers that have been shooting. They're two Athens photographers and me. And then it's sort of a theme, I guess. In Chapel Hill, I'm going to do it with Michael Galinsky, who's a filmmaker and a photographer. Was in a band in the 90s and always had his camera. So whoever his band played with and stuff, he took pictures and great photos. He was a little different than me, where I wish I did more of this. He took a lot of pictures of like band PR photos, and I did some of that, but a lot of people hanging out, and he didn't really take a whole lot of live photos, unless I just haven't seen a lot of them. But I was always doing the live stuff, and then sometimes I would take a few shots if I had a couple shots left on the roll, people hanging out in the dressing room or something. And then Atlanta and oh yeah, Asheville, North Carolina. I was going to do that last year at this anarchist bookshop, but the hurricane hit, so they were back up and running full speed now, and I'm gonna do that. So that'll be fun. I like talking to people and getting, talking about music and photography and stuff.
Well, if you ever want to come to Minnesota, let me know. I can try and hook you up with a place here.
Yeah, I would. I haven't really I've stuck to the either East Coast or West Coast. Texas will be my first one, you know, uh more towards the middle of the country. But I love Minnesota. It's a very liberal town and so
And you have some
yeah.
Husker Du and replacements photos in the book, so there is some local
Yeah, I
interest,
do.
maybe.
Yeah. Do you live in Minneapolis or
Yeah, in the Twin
yeah,
Cities. Yeah.
in the Twin Cities? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So you mentioned another exhibition at the Atlantis for with some photos that I think were part of the book about the 930 Club. Tell us about that book and what photos of yours are in there.
Yeah, the 930 came out with a book on their 30th anniversary, and that was, I guess, 15 years ago, because now it's their 45th, and that book was sold out for a long time. And since then, they opened this club that is supposed to be an homage to the old 930 Club. It's a smaller venue, and I've already referred to it a couple times in ways that people might not know what I was talking about because they didn't really explain it. But they did. Uh, they wanted to launch it with like a bunch of bands that are bigger than a place that fits 450 people to play. And it was a lottery. You could put in for tickets, and they sold it. And it was 44 years since that club opened. And the club before it was the 930 Club was called the Atlantis. That's why they called it that. And then when even before the current people that own 930 Club bought it, the owner before changed it to the 930 Club because that was just the address. So they had 44 shows of bands like the Foo Fighters kicked it off, and the Pretenders, and Luna, and X, and Parliament Funkadelic. And so I pitched to them. I was like, "Hey, I have all these photos from the old club that I photographed, and if your idea is to make this an homage and get that same energy from the old club here, you should have me photograph the 44 shows." And they went for it. And to my surprise, then I had to, be careful what you wish for. Then I had to go to 44 shows in 3 months, which is probably the most shows I ever went to in that short period of time. But it was a great experience, and the photos came out really great. And they have a photo exhibit up in a stairwell that goes from the dressing room to the stage. So they're not it's more for like musicians to be inspired by the old by the last two shots before they go on stage are shots from the old club. There's a shot from Hardcore Matinee where the band Discharge is playing, where it's like this guy jumping off and kicking off the pole in the old club. And then there's another one of Fugazi taken from the back of the stage. So you see the whole crowd and the whole club, and you see the person taking video up in the little crow's nest,
Yeah.
So those are the last two shots that a band sees before they go on stage, like to, give them some inspiration of the energy of the old club. But all the photos going down are 44 from those shows. And it's been fun, like I've already gotten pictures. Like sometimes one of the bands was Gogol Bordello, and the guy Eugene from that band was at the club recently playing a show with someone else, and he saw the picture of himself, and he took a picture of himself with the picture and posted it and stuff. And
Oh,
so
cool.
the club is the summertime is kind of slow, but I'm sort of excited to see what bands will go through there and see the photos and talk about them and stuff because the bands are the only people that get to see it. There was a show, they're offering like 4 events where the public gets to go in and they're allowed backstage, like when the club is dark.
One thing that I haven't asked about yet is, although I think it got referred to, is that you were the director of photography for 2 documentary films made with Scott Crawford. And side note, I interviewed him in episode 15, so folks should go back and listen to that, on the
Oh,
films Salad Days and Cream. Tell me about that. Like, I know very little about video. I know photography more, but what does a director of photography do for a film, and what was your role? And do you do other video work?
yeah, I've done video for a long time, back when it was actual video, VHS and stuff in the 80s. I did events and things in 90s. A director of photography is in charge of doing all the filming of a movie. So I shot both those movies. Almost all of Salad Days, except for a few interviews that were done out of town, and we didn't have the money to travel, so we hired a crew. And the same goes with the Cream one. I did the majority of it, but there was a few shoots. So I was responsible. A director of photography is responsible for the look of the photography of the way the interviews are shot. Um, and I actually wore a few different hats on Salad Days. I edited that film, and I acted as a producer too. So that was just kind of Scott and I doing the whole thing basically ourselves and kind of making it up as we go along because that was our first. I had shot things for other people, but I've never shot a whole feature length film and I never edited one either. So that was a great experience. And the Cream one, I started doing some editing, and Scott was the writer director, but the producer was the son of the guy that started Cream magazine. So he ended up getting more funding and hiring more people. So he ended up getting another editor and whatnot. But that movie is very good. If anyone isn't familiar with Cream magazine, the movie's called the America's Only Rock and Roll Magazine because that's kind of a jab at Rolling Stone because they would say that was on their masthead, and it was like a jab at Rolling Stone at the time because they were the second biggest music magazine at the time, and they were way cooler and just raunchier and stuff. There's a line in the movie where one of the writers said, like, in 1976, Rolling Stone thought the hottest new thing was going to be James Taylor, you know, and Cream was covering like the MC5 and punk and noise stuff.
Am I remembering right that Cream might have even coined the term punk rock or
Well,
popularized it?
yeah, I think they might have popularized it. Like a lot of people claim fame to that. Legs McNeil had a magazine, a fanzine called Punk, and that was in the early mid '70s. And then some people will say the first time they saw that word used was as early as '72 or thereabouts from Suicide. The New York band Suicide, put out a flyer for their show, and it said punk rock or
Hmm.
punk music. But I think they definitely popularized it.
Yeah. And whereas at that time, Rolling Stone wouldn't give the time of day to any of the new punk stuff coming out. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think they had to pay attention to bands like the Sex Pistols and stuff when they started making a bunch of noise and getting on the news and stuff. But yeah, they didn't pay much attention.
So as we're getting closer to winding down, any new projects you have on the horizon that you'd like to let people know about?
Yeah, well, I mentioned they're not really projects, but the things I'm doing, but I do have ideas for other books, and they, I have a lot of photos that, I mean, this book is big and stuff, but I have a lot that aren't in there, and I have other bands that got cut from there because it was already like gigantic, and I have a lot of photos from certain bands. Like there's only like 40 photos of Fugazi in the book or somewhere around there, but I have like 1,000 frames, or over 1,000 frames of Fugazi, and so many. It was so hard cutting it down. So I don't know. I'm gonna wait. Like this, the North American version of In My Eyes was probably going to be pretty close to being sold out by the end of the year. And then I have a European version coming out, which is going to look different and have a different size. And I couldn't really sell too efficiently. I had a lot of interest in Europe and even Asia for that matter, but it was just too expensive to ship it.
Yeah.
And some people did wanted it so bad they paid, twice the price to get it, or even more than twice to get it shipped. But now it'll be produced in Europe, and I'm probably going to go do a little European tour with the publisher over there, and then I'll do another book in probably next year or sometime. I'm not sure what that will be yet, but it'll be another photography book that, I mean, I made a career out of photography, and I started thinking that I would do social justice stuff where, appropriate for this podcast. The photographer Sebastião Salgado was a huge influence on me, and he did a book called Workers, which,
Yeah.
showed people like doing or horrible, like, jobs, from diamond mining to coffee bean picking in Colombia and stuff. And, I was so inspired by that. That's what I thought I wanted to do.
I'd love to hear, you mentioned just now Sebastião Salgado. Are there any photographers you've been inspired by recently? Like, could be famous people, could be someone you met at a punk show recently. Anyone you'd like to shout out?
Yeah. Like, as far as, I mean, like, Salgado was like like an early inspiration on, where I thought my career would go. And then I was already doing a lot of music and stuff. And I think Bob Gruen is the real inspiration as far as the music photography and stuff. I got to interview him for the Creem doc and go to his apartment, and he's just real affable guy that was showing me. I was just like, "Ah," you know, just all these prints laying around, these like iconic photos and stuff. So that was really cool. He was really nice, and so it was nice to like when your hero isn't like a dick.
Yeah.
I like other music photographers. There's a young woman here in DC, Lebanese woman called Farah. Her name is Farah Skaki, and she does a lot of hardcore, and she's also does photographs, drag shows, and she also does food too. So she's very eclectic in her photography. But she's has said she was inspired by my work for her music work, and I can see that in there. And her work's really great. So you should. I think her Instagram is the really Farah or something. She's worth following. She's really good.
Okay.
And my Instagram is just my name at Jim Saah. I'm worth following.
Is that the best
Maybe.
place? I think so. Is that the
Okay.
best place for people to find you and your work online? You're on Instagram?
Yeah, pretty much. If you're interested in music, I'm gonna start a second Instagram where I was really into street photography for a long time, and I've sort of haven't done it as much. The phones kind of can help and kill it at the same time, So, but yeah, the Instagram one is primarily all music stuff. And my website is also my name, jimsaah.com, JIMSAAH.com. And there's more of my different types of photography on there and music photography. And if you're interested in my book, there's a link to where you can get it on there as well.
That sounds great. So I had a whole bunch of questions that I didn't get to, and there's so many things you said that I would love to follow up on and ask more about. But in the interest of time, we're not going to do that, unfortunately.
I mean, if you have a good reaction and want to do a part two, I'm down. Or if you want to cut out some of my rants and come back and ask me some other questions, I can do that as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, well, I think we can make that happen. Maybe a part two.
Mhm.
This is certainly a niche podcast. It's not like I'm getting thousands of listeners every time, but that's okay because I'm doing it because it's fun and I like doing it, and hopefully it's of interest to someone beyond me, and
Yeah,
I think it will be.
yeah. And I listened to several when you told me we were doing this, and I really enjoyed them. I mean, as a photographer, I mean, it's probably niche in that like other photographers and music people listen. But a lot of people are interested in music photography, and then you have the political bent. So I don't know. I think you could draw people from different areas.
That's the hope, anyway. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much again for coming on. I appreciate your time and all the work you do and the inspiration that you've provided me around music photography and connecting music and the politics. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You can support Red Lens Podcast by supporting my Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Seagull Photos, SIGALPHOTOS, and sign up for a small monthly donation. That will go a long way in helping sustain the podcast and my work as a political photographer. Thank you for checking out and supporting Red Lens Podcast.